Hope you can hear me. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to try to follow up on this most excellent speech we just heard with the outlook and the market trends that I think are going to be playing out over the next few years. So just a quick run through. I have a brief introduction. I'll talk a little about approved biosimilars and then discuss market segmentation, look a little around the launched biosimilars, what kind of success factors do we see, what kind of obstacles have been noticed, and then a look at the future and what lies ahead. So just a brief introduction here for those not familiar. So what is this that we're talking about? So this is a biological product that is not necessarily identical, but in all relevant aspects, it is highly similar to the originator product. So there should be no meaningful difference in terms of its clinical performance. And then we can think about what you mean then by highly similar. So they have a few different definitions there, depending if you're talking to the FDA or the EMA. But it's essentially that the structure, the biological activity, efficacy, safety, etc., that profile has to be, you should be able to tell the two apart. That's it. Here's a kind of grainy picture, but you can see, so you have a reference product over here, and then you have the biosimilar, and it looks more or less similar, except that maybe you have some slight difference in the side chain over there. Okay, so we have a history here. The first approved biosimilar happened over 10 years ago. It's a growth hormone. And as of in August of last year, when I was preparing for these slides, there were about 50 biosimilars approved in Europe. I think that number is increased already. These approvals, then you would see they cover a number of different therapy areas and types of products. So you have growth hormone, insulin, I think it's follicle stimulating, and then you have some TNF inhibitors and also a number of mAbs. So if we look at more closely then at what are then these approved. So if we talk about what are the originated drugs that the biosimilar developers and makers are targeting, it's of course those with high sales. So I looked at it. So the product with the most biosimilars is Neupogen. And number 2, you have adalimumab, not surprisingly, of course. And then rituximab and infliximab. And then there are a few others also that follow, but these are the top 4, I would say. So in the US, there are several drugs that have been approved by the FDA, but you can't find them on the market. So I believe there are about 3 products, biosimilar products on the market in the US at the moment. So you have two Humira biosimilars approved, but yes, they won't be, there is nothing happening there until 2023 due to legal issues. You have, for Remicade, you have available biosimilars, but the market penetration is really low. So we're talking about 5% of the total sales, which is barely registering. And as a contrast, if you look in Europe, Remicade would cover for more than half of the sales with biosimilars. So this is the same example that we heard Aurelio speak about, but I have a slightly different perspective. So why is why are these drugs being put? What's the business case here for the biosimilars? Well, it's about the savings. So the chart that we saw in the previous talk, it covers about 400 million pounds. That is what NHS England spends on Humira each year. And before they did strike this biosimilars deal with this quartet of companies, that was the spending. And after that, they are looking at saving about 150 million pounds a year. And for NHS England, that would, I mean, you can add whatever numbers you want, but one comparison would be that it would cover the cost of about almost 12,000 community nurses. So it's that's kind of what you have in the balance there. So in the European markets, the sales are rising quite rapidly. It's about they account for about $4 billion this year, and compared then up from $2.5 billion last year. Again, so rituximab biosimilars, they cover about 70% of the Nordics and 80% of the UK market. And in France, you have now 30% of infliximab sales are covered by biosimilars. And that is to compare with about 5% 3 years ago. So there's quite a significant market penetration and a fairly rapid uptake. And this also, I think, goes together well with the data that Aurelio showed previously. One interesting note here, I think, is that it appears that the uptake of biosimilars is slower for self-injected products. And here is an illustration of that. So you have, let's see, yeah. So this is infliximab, which is which is a drug that you would receive in a clinic. And here you have a picture showing the etanercept. So this is Enbrel, which you self-medicate. And the colors then demonstrate the penetration of the biosimilars. So the darker colors then would represent a higher uptake. And there you can clearly see that you have very good market penetration of infliximab across Europe, while Enbrel is I would say, is lagging. You still have a good uptake here in Norway, so and Denmark, so they apparently have gone all in then on biosimilars, I would say. So what are then the presentations? So what kind of primary packaging are favored then for biosimilars? It's actually mostly depending on the therapy area and what the expected use of the drug is. So, for example, oncology products are often filled in vials, so it's infusion or given in a clinic. And then a vial probably is a good choice. It's fairly cheap. And also in some cases you have lyo formulations, which also then require reconstitution, etc. So there's an advantage there for them. If you have subcutaneous delivery, some form of syringe presentation is the most common. But you can also have cartridges, especially then for diabetes products, for using pens. And the only biosimilars that I've found where you would find the device presentation is if the reference product is available in a device. Here are then examples of biosimilars that have a device presentation. So you have, Here are a couple of auto-injectors, so Benepali, Imraldi, in these kind of two-step auto-injectors. This is Amjevita, I think, and here you have RLC and Julio, also in two-step auto-injectors. Here you have some kind of, this is for, how do you say, if you have trouble conceiving a child, so this is for some kind of a hormone treatment, and that is typically, you want something that will help them to overcome the nervousness, I would say, around the self-injection. And as you can see here, this is a Sandoz product, and the device here is shared with Novartis, so it's the same type of device that you would find for Cosentyx, for example. The Amjevita, this one is also for Amgen a common device. It's the same that they use for Enbrel. Here this is a fairly well-established platform that they've used for Benepali. And I think that is kind of a message here that for the most cases, we expect the biosimilars to be under cost pressure. So I wouldn't be expecting a lot of companies to be spending a lot of research and development for devices unless they can be used in a wider, to cover a wider product range or already be part of a company's device platform. But all in all, I would say that the choice of presentation doesn't really seem to have an impact. If you look at Europe, because that is the only place where we have some meaningful data, the range of products are evenly distributed, I would say, across the vials, prefilled syringes, and devices or auto-injectors. You could say maybe that for Amgen, the use of the OnPro device, that could be a competitive advantage for Neulasta, which we know is under a lot of competition when it comes to a number of biosimilars. So here maybe there could be a case to say that for the patient there is an added value in using the Amgen product because they get access to the OnPro device. If we look at the evolution then of the market technology, I would say that we are expecting to see more biosimilars in devices from companies that have access to an existing device platform or that can buy into some kind of a pre-configured device where they don't have to spend a lot of money and time on the development. I'd say that here the important thing to bear in mind is that biosimilars will always be under competitive pressure. So for innovators, of course, you have a best case, you will have a few years where you are still covered by the patent, and so you don't really have any competitive pressure if you're first on market. But for biosimilars, that will never be the case. I believe that we will see a continued launch of biosimilars in prefilled syringes because there's a huge advantage of a simpler combination product. There is a less technical and less regulatory burden considering those. And I also think that as this progresses, the self-injecting with a syringe isn't really going to be seen as much of a problem. Maybe you can solve some concerns with safety syringes or similar devices. There is one thing, though, that if we look at the self-injected products, as I said, we don't see the same market penetration as for the oncology or the clinic given products. And there, you could maybe make a case that using a device there could be help with the market penetration. But that, again, I'm not seeing that at the moment as being the key driver. I think cost is a lot more important. So if we talk about the therapy areas, so you have, at the moment, they are mostly in the areas of oncology, autoimmune diseases, and hematology. Going forward, I expect to see a lot more biosimilar drugs in the area of diabetes, but also in rare diseases. But maybe not. I mean, there you have. There are some rare diseases where you have really rare. So yeah, the number of patients is extremely small. I think this is a case where you have kind of a borderline rare disease, where you have a fairly large patient population to support the development of the biosimilar. I also expect the EU to continue to be the major market for several years, and not only just until 2023, where we expect to see Humira biosimilars being available in the US, but also because they're much further ahead in terms of the market and the user acceptance, and also that the payer situation is a lot clearer at the moment. And we already have a significant market penetration of the biosimilars in the EU. For the US, I believe that there will be some kind of policy changes needed to see accelerating numbers in the available biosimilars. Another trend that I think is of great interest is, at the moment, the availability of biological drugs is somewhat limited. The therapies are very costly, so that, of course, will limit access in certain parts of the world. The lower cost of the biosimilars will very likely increase the availability of these drugs, and it will also be. You will also have a more distributed network of producers. So you have the competition that allows payers to negotiate price. And in this case, I would say that drugs with a large patient base, or that can be applied across multiple diseases, are the ones that will be most likely spread across the globe. And another trend that I believe we'll see is that this wider spread of the drugs will also drive development of alternative formulations. And that can be driven by cold chain difficulties in warmer countries. So you would, for example, have lyo formulations being developed of a biosimilar, or because you want to have increased stability or a shelf life in order to have a more advantageous supply chain. So to summarize this, the EU is the major market for biosimilars at the moment, will likely be also for a few more years at least. And this is both the number of the approved drugs that we have, but and also the market penetration of the biosimilars. There is a trend in that self-injected products see a slower uptake over IV or clinic delivered drugs. The drug delivery, so the IV or subcutaneous, etc., those are the main drivers then for the choice of a presentation of biosimilars. And we expect the US to grow significantly once the barriers that are there at the moment are removed or reduced. The growth of biosimilars will eventually come from increased market access, and the savings for the payers are going to be significant. And that, I think, will increasingly then drive incentives for substitution. And then finally, I would also say that we expect a lot more biosimilars in the therapy areas where you have large patient populations, because that is where you can apply better the economy of scale. Okay, thank you very much.